for a certain. How does he do that? Does he put thoughts into your head?
Right.
And I don't think that's what they really mean. But I again ask them to clarify these things. A lot of these things are very vague.
Yeah.
And I think what they really mean is, oh well, God revealed Himself in Scripture. Okay, well you have to use your senses to read that book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you know your senses are valid to be able to read the book to know what it says?
Right.
Again, it comes down to they have an account for it, and that's what I'll say. I don't know why this stupid hangout toolbox is not working for my. Let me do a refresh real quick here.
Yeah, and Sokka, I double checked. It's not being broadcast live to my channel.
All right.
It's being recorded to it, but nobody else will see it, and only you guys have a link to it. And if you need it, I'll make sure and give it to you after the hangout's over. Only someone with the link can come and watch it. Not even now, but after it's recorded. Only someone with the link.
Yeah. The thing with that is that, and this is where Arcane moved last night, where it was just like, okay, well, how can you process a revelation, without using your reasoning? And he backed into the, well, do you believe that an infinitely powered God is able to reveal things to me in a way that I can understand them without using my reasoning? And I'm like, no, that's illogical. But that's the point that he's stuck on now.
Yeah.
Oops. Well, yeah. What he's doing there is he's inviting you to do an internal critique, saying, well, if my God exists, and if He creates our brains and our senses, and is it possible that He can know things? Well, given all that, yes, that is true. But that begs the question: how do you know all that's true? Oh, that's an external critique, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you can do invite him to do an internal critique. Well. If reality is such where it has stable laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, that through natural selection and genetic drift and so forth, we're able to develop brains with reliable mechanisms. Can I know things? Given all that. Mm-hmm. And if he's honest, he should say yes. No, he won't. He'll protest the whole thing.
Yeah. I was just gonna say he would derail that whole point before you even get that far.
Yeah. So there's a hypocrisy.
Yeah.
He wants you to do an internal critique in his worldview, but he's doing an external critique on your worldview, questioning your presuppositions, where he wants you to take his presuppositions for granted and take him to a logical conclusion. Now, there's other problems in his worldview, such as deceiving agents. He's deceiving demons, and also he is a deceiving God. So, the question to ask him: how does he know that he's not one of the deceived? Mm-hmm. Without begging the question, he can't do it. But that's just a trick. But he's doing tricks on you. So why can't we do tricks on him?
So right. If he says that he can get to this stage, that God can reveal things, that he can understand things without having to use his reasoning, wouldn't a logical conclusion then be to say that he can come to any conclusion without actually using his reasoning? So his reasoning in itself is a non-issue for him, that he doesn't even need to validate his reasoning. But now what he has to do is validate whether or not he's actually properly perceiving what an omniscient being is giving him, and not just a puppet.
Yeah, it's confused to say that he's not using his reasoning. Well, he reasons with his God's brain. No, everyone reasons with their brain. It's like saying, oh, well, when you don't digest with your digestive system,
right?
You don't think with your brain. Everyone thinks with your brain.
That is so simple. I can't believe I haven't even thought about that.
Yeah, it's confused. The past generation of presuppers would simply say, I have an account for my reasoning capacities, not this, validate your reasoning with your reasoning crap. And what account means is I have a cause for, or I have a story for.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the thing is that I've watched him discuss this with Ozzy, and I've watched him discuss this with you. And like I said, I can't speak about it as gracefully as you guys can, because you guys have explained it very clearly to him. that there's something wrong here. So what I'm looking for is that kink in the armor that is going to bring him to like this complete illogical point. And what I've seen and what I was trying to get at last night, except I'm not going to say who, but somebody in this chat room with a Thor icon kept on jumping in. Is that part though?
I hate when people interrupt.
Is that okay? So if he no longer and this is the flaw in his argument that I want to try to get at here, and that is that if he wants to go back into his shell here and basically say that God is powerful enough to reveal things to him that he does not have to use his reasoning to justify it, well then his reasoning in itself is a non-issue for him, and he doesn't even use his reasoning. So he actually has no need or account to even use reasoning. That if he wants to go that way, then essentially all he is at this point in time is that he's asserting that he is a puppet for something that is controlling him in a certain way. And once he's being controlled in a certain way, he has to understand that while being controlled, that any powerful being or whatever inside of his worldview, whether it be a demon or whatever, can be the puppet master, and he has no way to validate that unless he goes back into his reasoning to try to figure out what's actually controlling him.
Yeah, it's absurd. Everyone has to use your reasoning to reason. I mean, it's ridiculous. Again, the more sophisticated presupper would just say, I simply have an account for my reasoning, which, again, account simply means I have a cause for, or I have an explanation for. I have a story for why I can reason. It's a God of the gaps. It's no different than,
That's when it comes to necessity, right? If he just comes up with this is why, this is an account for it, now I have to get to the necessity of why I even need to account for it this way.
Yeah, the story I give is we're 3,000 years ago in Greece, and Socrates is having his dialogue with Euthyphro, and as they're having their discussion, lightning strikes, and Euthyphro says, "Aha! I can account for lightning. Zeus casts it down from the heavens. Now, do you have an account to explain where lightning comes from?" "Oh, gee, I don't know." It just becomes an argument from ignorance. And we now know where lightning comes from. We know where earthquakes come from and everything. So what the religious has done is they moved on to more abstract things like numbers, concepts, logic, things like that. So, that's what's going on. But yeah, if they say, well, if Arcane actually says, oh yeah, God is actually zapping thoughts into his head, well, that's even more reason to be skeptical. Your epistemology is just some external agent is zapping thoughts in your head. Well, how do you know those thoughts are valid? And again, does he have reasons to doubt those thoughts? According to the Bible, he has absolutely big reasons to doubt it, because in his Bible,
he'll take it to say that the Bible is his revealed word that he tested against.
Yeah, and his Bible says that his God gives people strong delusions and put lying spirits into the mouths of the prophets, and plus there's deceiving demons. So in his ontology, he has even more reason to doubt his thoughts than we do.
That's a very I can remember the passage, and I just to me at this point now in my life, I used to actually preach this stuff, and in this point in my life, I read that passage and I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure that's probably an inside joke right there. Like he's gonna put the lying spirits in the mouths of his prophets, and to me that sounds like ha ha ha, that's the joke, ladies and gentlemen, this is nonsense. Wake up.
And so much for this free will. Well, Arcane doesn't go there. Arcane's probably a determinist since he's Calvinist probably. But when people like Nate Cunningham,
he's not. He's not. He's really not, Floyd. He's a Armenian.
Really?
Oh yeah. I tried the free will argument on him, and he's basically denied it. No, he said we have free will, and he argues against Calvinists. So, yeah.
Okay, because most presuppositionalists are Calvinists, but I guess everyone's just joined the bandwagon because
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think Fritz is a Calvinist either, is he? Oh, maybe he is. Fritz might be.
Yeah, they might be like a 4-point Calvinist or something.
Right.
I can do my slideshow if you guys are interested.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's start it up.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I like to do internal critique. So I like to use, so in a debate, I like to use their definitions. Because if you use their definitions, they can't protest, right?
Right.
So as much as you use their presuppositions, their definitions, their terms, the less they can protest. And they can't say you're doing a straw man, right?
Right.
Yeah. So okay. There's always talk about worldviews. So what's a worldview? So this is Greg Bonson's definition of worldview. Greg Bonson is basically the presuppositionalist. Kind of like he was the lead. He was a student of Cornelius Van Til, who was pretty much the father of presuppositionalism, and Greg Bronson had his famous debate with Gordon Stein, which kind of kicked off the whole fad of tag and presuppositionalism. He defines a worldview as a network of presuppositions not tested by natural science in terms by which all experience is related and interpreted. A person's worldview is a network, first of all. It's just not one belief. It is a whole system of beliefs. But the kind of beliefs we're dealing with is when we're talking about a worldview. It's a special variety of belief called presuppositions. So basically, a worldview is a network of presuppositions. Okay, so what is a presupposition? Again, according to Greg Bonson, so I'm not straw manning them. A presupposition is just any assumption. It's not just any assumption that a person has. It is a very fundamental or logically basic assumption. It is, in fact, the precondition of that person's thinking. Because a person's presupposition is about the nature of reality, nature of knowledge, and the nature of human conduct and value, a person's presupposition provide the precondition for choosing the problems that you consider generally problematic, giving you a method for discovering and resolving, providing for you the standard of interpretation. So again, these are your very fundamental, your foundational beliefs, at the very core. And then Saka, you wrote down a list of our presuppositions, earlier in watching Ozzy's video of our properly basic beliefs. I go on. John Frame was another student of Cornelius Van Til. And he says a presupposition is a belief that takes precedence over another and therefore serves as a criterion for another. An ultimate presupposition is beliefs over which no other takes precedence. So if you derived a presupposition, it wouldn't be your ultimate presupposition because the one that you derived it from would be. So there's nothing prior to a presupposition. And John Frame says, for a Christian, the content of Scripture must serve as his ultimate presupposition. This doctrine is merely the outworking of the lordship of God in the area of human thought. It merely applies the doctrine of scriptural infallibility to the realm of knowing. So they're starting with the Bible. A lot of problems there. How do you start with the Bible without reading it? All right, and then you have to trust your senses, right? And so forth. Oh, and if you trust induction, well, how do you know the Bible won't say something different tomorrow, right? You're assuming induction. There's a lot of problems with this statement here.
So would it benefit at that point in time so if you question a presupper on the problem of induction, how do they verify it, qualify it, quantify it?
Well, they say their God is unchangeable. He's consistent, and they might refer to some Bible verses that say that God promises to keep the seasons regular and stuff like that. So So God is revealing to them that induction works, so to speak. But again, where are they getting that from the Bible? Oh, whoa, okay. Well, how do you know the Bible won't be different tomorrow? Oh, because the Bible says so. Oh, circular reasoning. Sorry. That's how you argue that.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah. So So Saka, these are the presuppositions of my worldview, and these are actually just not all of them. These are some of them. You could probably think of more. But there's a lot. We believe that there's a mind-independent reality, which is the opposite of solipsism. We just assume that there's no experience, there's no argument that we can give to disprove that. What are you going to do? You're going to rely on your senses. You're going to rely on your experience. All that could simply be in your mind. How can you get out of it? So we just assume that. Okay. We also assume there's other minds. So I don't believe you guys are zombies. I believe you actually you're actually real people that I'm talking to right now. Three, the valid nature of logical deduction. How can you prove logic is valid? You're going to use logic to do that? That begs the question, right?
Right.
So again, and when they ask, well, how do you validate logic in your worldview? Oh, it validates. Yeah, that keyword validate. So they're asking you to have a logical proof for logic. Do they do that? No, they just say their God is logical, which is circular reasoning. How is he logical? And to say he's logical assumes that logic is valid. So again, are they giving a validation for? No, they're just giving an account of. Where does logic come from? Oh, well, my God's logical. So they're just offering an account. They're not offering a valid syllogism of why logic is valid. The reliability of induction. Again, the Hume's problem of induction. There's no way to logically validate induction. And that's why we call it induction. It's not deduction. It's induction. There's another form of reasoning called abduction, which basically means the best explanation for. So there's deduction, induction, and abduction. A causation. Some events are caused by another. So let's say you stick your hand in the fire, right, and your skin gets burned, right? Well, what caused your skin to get burned? Well, we assume the fire, right? But it could just be a coincidence. It could be a coincidence that every time that happens, the skin burning fairies come around and burn your hands, and it's not actually fire that's doing it. It's something else. But we assume that there's actual causation that's going on in the universe. Okay, concepts of truth that propositions can correspond to the state of affairs. Reliability on our perception, that we think our senses are reliable. Now they'll say, oh, well, how do you know that? In my worldview, we have a God that created us in His own image, and wants us to know things. So He gave us good senses. Oh, how do we know that? Oh, well, okay, evolution designed our senses reliably. Same thing with our memory. Reliable on memory. If our memories didn't work, I wouldn't be able to form a sentence. I would forget what I said. I'd forget the first words I said at the beginning of my sentence when I before I got to the end of the sentence. So if my memory wasn't working, I wouldn't. You couldn't do anything. And concept of self and agency, that you're an actual person that can act in the world.
So when faced with the question, do you use your reasoning to justify your reasoning? How do you fall back on your presuppositions then?
Well, okay, the key word there is use. Do you use your reasoning to validate your reasoning? Yes, of course. Do you it's like asking, do you use your thinking to think? Well, how could you not use your thinking to think? It's the same thing. What they should be asking, and what you need them to state their question as, are you validating your reasoning by appealing to your reasoning? That would be a more honest question they should be asking. And I would say, do you mean what I just said? Do you actually mean, am I validating my reasoning with my reasoning? And they would say, okay, yes, okay, I'll go along with that question. And say, oh no, they're asking you to account for your reasoning. And again, you can say, oh, my reasoning was developed through a natural selection over millions of years, which developed my reliably thinking brain. That's how I account for my reasoning. And then then of course the cyclone script will then say, well, how do you know that? Whenever they get stuck on anything, they can always fall back to, how do you know that? Like a little kid, debating. When stuck, to say, how do you know that? I mean, that's part of their script.
But when they get to the how do you know that, then you're going back to your epistemology. It's like, well,
exactly.
These are my presuppositions.
Yeah, so the nature of my presuppositions are properly basic beliefs. This is the basis of my rationality and reasonableness. And isn't that exactly what Bonson said? That forms the basis of your rationality. This is exactly what Bonson said. And they're unjustified axioms. Okay, if you try to justify them, you would need another set of axioms, right? So they wouldn't be your presuppositions. So these are the very ladder mechanisms in which you do reason. Okay, my epistemology. Okay, epistemology is the theory of knowledge. In philosophy, there's different branches of philosophy. There's epistemology, metaphysics, ethics. There's some more. I forget what the other ones are. I think logic is another one, although that might be a part of epistemology. But epistemology attempts to answer questions like, what is knowledge, and how do you know things? Of course, you always hear, what is knowledge? You always hear justified true belief from them, which is kind of it's somewhat a problematic definition. You saw the Ozzy's hangout with Arcane, right? When Arcane and Ozzy went at it. That's a must-see, hangout. I definitely recommend that, because Ozzy actually explains all this stuff I'm explaining now. My epistemology it's called I'm a reliabilist, reliabilism. And that's a form of epistemic externalism, which I'll explain what externalism is next slide. And the way it works is, I can know something, A, I'm A in this case, can know proposition P if and only if that A believes in P, that actually believes the proposition is actually true, and also my belief came about, my belief was produced by a state of affairs which via a reliable mechanism. And I gave the example of an orange sitting on a table. I can give an example of the computer in front of me. I can know that there's a computer in front of me if, one, there is actually a computer in front of me. That's the metaphysical truth condition. Two, I actually believe that there's a computer in front of me. That's the dosatic or dosatic condition. That basically means I believe it, the belief condition. And then the justification condition is that my belief is actually caused by the computer being in front of me. So,
okay. So the when you're pleading to the external source, it's the last point there that the computer actually has to be out there in front of you, right? That
right, yeah. The justification piece is always the hard part of epistemology. We can understand. We can understand. That has to be true, and we can understand you have to believe it. I mean, those are kind of simple, right?
Yeah.
But the big question is, how do we actually justify that? That is always the real stickler with this whole.
Right. So yeah. So that's the point there where it's now is like, well, wouldn't that be subjective in nature? How do you know that? This is where they're going to try to force you into an internalist view here, aren't they?
Exactly.
Okay. So right there. This is one of the parts that I think I need to kind of focus on here a little bit. Is how do you justify your externalist view?
All right. So, okay. So for reliabilism, knowledge is a species of reliably produced true belief. So, again, if my senses are reliable, then I can know that there is a computer in front of me. But that begs the question: well, how do you know your senses are reliable? Right. That's what they're going to bring up. All right. So here we are: internalist versus externalist justification. Okay. An internalist, every condition must themselves. To be an internalist, every condition must themselves be immediately known or consciously available to the believing agent in order for the true belief to be justified. Now, that's very hard because you run into the how do you know problem with that. So, how do I know there's a computer in front of me? Oh, well, the site of the computer. How do I know the computer's in front of me? I'm looking at it, right? Okay, well, how do you know the condition? How do you know your eyes are working properly? Oh, well, the photons from the computer, penetrated my lenses, hit my retina, and so forth, and then went into my brain and so forth like that. Well, how do you know your brain's working properly? Oh, because my neurons are firing. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Very difficult. And internalist justification is very difficult to justify because it's the KK principle. Know that you know. An infinite regress happens. You can always ask, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? All right. So most epistemologists nowadays are what's called an externalist. Okay, externalist. The conditions for justifications are real, but not necessarily available or are external to the agent in question. So you have to be justified and not know that you're justified. That's different. You have to be justified, but you don't have to know that you're justified. So, for example, for you to be able to drive your car, right, you don't have to know how your car works, right? You don't have to know how the engine fires and the spark plugs ignite the gasoline and the pistons go down and it turns the I don't know what you call it. I'm not a mechanic, so. But you don't need to know the inner workings of a car to be able to drive it, right? Just like you don't need to know the inner workings of your brain or how your senses work to be able to use them, right?
So this is where you could fall back on. It's like, well, yeah, one of my presuppositions is the causation. That I know that these things are going to happen because of the external world type thing. So I don't need to justify how the every single mechanic of the car works. All I know is that it does work.
Yeah. So some are externalists, and so are presuppositionalists. They're externalists. What are they relying on? Well, their God. Their God is external to them, right? So if we counter them saying, how do you know your God exists? We're now demanding an internalist justification for their worldview. So we're turning it back on them, saying, well, how do you know your God exists? How do you know your God isn't deceiving you? How do you know this? That so we're demanding an internalist thing, and they say, no. Those are my presuppositions. And where Arcane says, that's where Arcane goes into, well, if you accept that my God exists and He creates in our own image, are you willing to admit? I'm sorry, I get that mixed up. When we say, how do you know your God exists? That's actually no, I'm jumping ahead. That's actually internalist versus externalist. I'm actually jumping ahead. They're externalists because they rely on their God to justify things. They relied on their God to create their thinking brains and stuff like that. I'm kind of messed up there, but I'm cleaning it out now. So I'm an externalist. They're externalists. And listen to what John Frame says. John Frame says, mysterious though the process may be, somehow God illumines the human mind to discern the divine source of the word. We know without knowing how we know. We know without knowing how we know. That is externalism. So they know, but they don't know how they know. So they're an externalist. Where an internalist would require you to know that you know. And here John Frame himself, the student of Cornelius Van Til, is actually expressing externalism. Again, God makes it so I can know things for certain. Boy, John Frame says, yeah, that process is mysterious. So how do you know that? So again, they're an externalist, like I'm an externalist. Okay, so so for my epistemology, I have an external epistemic justification based on evolutionary reliabilism. Let me break that down. That might sound, it's a lot of fancy words there. So I'm an externalist. I'm relying on means that are real, but I don't necessarily have to know that they're real. That's my justification based on my reliabilism, which is through the evolutionary process. That's all I'm really saying there. So what So what's your justification for your epistemology? Well, I have an external epistemological justification based on my evolutionary reliabilism. My senses and cognitive abilities are reliable because of the evolutionary process. And here I offer a syllogism. I say no brains with reliably belief-forming mechanisms structured by evolution, therefore no knowledge. I have knowledge, therefore we have brains with reliable belief-forming mechanisms structured by evolution. So this is
at this point in time, this is where Arcane would jump in and say, "But aren't you begging the question?"
Right. Well, they're going to ask you. He's going to ask you prove premise one. He's going to say, but this is a valid argument. This is modus tollens. If A, then B, not B. In this case, I know it's double negatives, but it'd be A. If A, then B, not B, therefore not A. So this is a modus tollens syllogism. It's logically valid. But yeah, they're going to question. Well, how do you know? Yeah, he's going to say, how do you know that your brain was reliably produced by evolution? They're going to ask that. But then, okay, we're back to how do you know that you know? So you want me to use my epistemology to validate that? Now we're back into validating your epistemology with your epistemology. Okay, that's an external critique. Here's internal versus external critique of a worldview. Okay, an internal critique assumes the truth of a worldview in order to examine that would be the case if it were true. It's a type of reductio ad absurdum to show that given the premises, the conclusion leads to a contradiction. It stays within the bounds of the belief set. So when Arcane says, are you willing to admit that if my God exists and created us in a certain way that we have good reasoning capabilities and our senses are working properly, are you willing to grant that I can know things? So he's saying, assume my presuppositions are true, take them to their logical conclusion. That's what he's saying. So he's inviting you to do an internal critique. And this is where the double standard comes in. They want you to do an internal critique in their worldview, but they want to do an external critique on our worldview. Now, external critique does not assume the truth of the worldview, but rather questions the validity of the beliefs of the worldview themselves with external facts. It goes beyond the bounds of the belief set. So, so if we ask them, prove that your God exists, prove that your God exists empirically, for example. Okay, we're demanding that they use empiricism to justify the existence of their God, and they'll just object, say, "Oh, nope, that's not part of my worldview. Sorry." So so whenever I try to debate any theist, I always try to do an internal critique as much as possible. If you try to do an external critique, they can just simply reject your criteria. You hear that by morale, when you get in a moral debate with them, they'll say, you say, "Oh, your God is evil." They'll say, "Oh, by what standard are you judging my God by?" you're judging by an external standard. That's an external critique. They'll just simply reject it. A flat earther can do the same thing. You can say, oh, well, I can prove the Earth is a sphere. We have satellite photographs of the Earth and so forth. They'll say, well, you got that from NASA. NASA is nothing but a bunch of Photoshop editors. They're going to reject that external evidence. So a double standard is they'll want you to do an internal critique on their worldview, but they'll do an external critique on your worldview. And that's what's back to here. No brains with reliable belief-forming mechanisms structured by evolution. They're going to say, well, validate that. I said, no, this is the case in my worldview. In my worldview, there's an external world. We have laws of nature, laws of physics, and so forth, which brought about the evolutionary process. And that's just the way it is in my worldview. So I talk about double standards here, justifying one's epistemology. Okay, so there's something called ontology. Okay, in philosophy, that's a branch of metaphysics which deals with the nature of being. Okay, this kind of explains what is something, what is reality, and so forth. Okay, but the way I'm using ontology is in logic. It's the set of entities that presupposed by a theory. So in this case, it's simply just a set of entities within your worldview, in your belief set. So if my worldview had pixies, for example, that could account for things. Say I have the pixie of logic that exists in my worldview. How do I account for logic? Oh, the logic pixie accounts for it. The logic pixie invented logic. So there's my justification. There's my account for logic in my worldview. So that's part of my ontology. My ontology is always pixies to do that. Now, obviously, you're just doing like a friction. What is it called? Not Christianity. Fictional Christianity. You're just making a fictional worldview. It's like saying, oh well, if Yahweh can account for it, Allah can account for it. That sort of.
So when it gets to our ontology, what are our set of entities? Would just be our presups?
Yeah, exactly. Our properly basic beliefs.
Properly basic beliefs. Okay.
Yeah. So in our ontology, there's a mind-independent reality, right? There are other minds. There's the laws of physics and nature and so forth. So those are certain things that exist in our ontology. So how do they justify their presupposition? Like I said before, there's a God and he created us in his own image, and he wants us to know things. So they justify their epistemology with their ontology. Okay, so why can't we do the same? We should be able to do this. We should be able to do this exact same thing. It's just our metaphysical backstory for why things are the way they are. Now, if they say, well, how do you know that? Okay, now that's the double standard. They want you to justify your epistemology with your epistemology. Whenever they say, how do you know whatever, you're no longer appealing to their ontology, you're appealing to your epistemology. So that's something to always be aware of. And it's simply calling that. Now, how do I account for logic? I can actually explain that. That's kind of complicated, but I can do that later if you want.
Sure. So whenever they ask me the how do you know that question, then you always go back and just basically say, well, now you're trying to get me to justify my epistemology, which what do I say? I mean, I don't need to do that.
Yeah, well, point out, said you wanted me to take for granted God exists, and if all those things are true, can you know things? Well, why aren't you willing to grant the same thing for me? If there, in my worldview, if there's a mind-independent reality, if there actually is a physical universe, and our minds were structured in such a way that we can know things through the millions of years of the evolutionary process, why can't I know things? Now, Arcane, if if you're willing to take those things for granted, will you admit that I can know things? Now he won't. You'll be fighting for an hour.
Right. So when it gets to the how do you know that? Just like, well, because my epistemology. Well, how do you know your epistemology is valid? It's like
my ontology.
My ontology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it gets back. Well, how do you know? How do you know that? Okay, now you can argue. Oh, you're demanding an internalist justification for my knowledge, where we hopefully we already accepted that we're both externalists, and that's something I brought up to Arcane, that we're both externalists. So stop asking me how do I know that I know. But that's how their cyclone script works. When stuck, just say, how do you know that? That's the part of the cyclone script. All right, yeah. Then here, account for versus validation for the past generation. Like Matt Slick, I would consider Matt Slick a past generation presuppositionalist, not a cyclone like Arcane is. They'll ask you, how do you account for? And he did that with Matt Dillahunty. How do you account for the laws of logic? How do you account for morality and reason? What does account for? Account simply means, and ask them to define what do you mean by account for. You got all these vague terms they use. When Arcade says, "Oh, I appeal to my God," what does it mean to appeal to your God? Are you saying you use your God's brain to think? No, they don't mean that. So you have to ask them, what do they mean by appeal to? Here they ask, account. What does account for means? Well, if you press them on it, they'll most likely say, where does it come from? Like, how do you account for logic? How do you account for the, how they say it, the immaterial, immutable, universal laws of logic? That's a question that Matt Slick would ask you. And what does he mean is, where do they come from, or what was the cause of? So when given an answer, they ask you for a they're going to ask you a validation for, or I see a lot of people make a mistake for, you start giving a logical validation for. No, that's not really asking. What they're asking is, they're asking for what do you think it comes from. Now again, why do we even need to know where everything comes from? There's tons of things that in our worldview that we don't know. Where things come from. Do we fully know, like, for example, where black holes come from or stuff like that? I guess maybe Lawrence Krauss could explain it or something. But there's a lot of mysteries. Like the lightning example. Where does lightning come from? 3,000 years ago, they thought Zeus did it. Do we actually need to know, have an account for everything? That just really becomes a argument for ignorance. And they do that with evolution. Well, where did the first life come from? You can't show abiogenesis. Oh, therefore all of evolution is bunk then. It's the same sort of thing. So just be aware of that. Account for versus validation for. They just offer an account. It's not logically valid. It's not logically valid. It's circular. If they say, "Oh, well, how do I account for logic?" Logic comes from, logic reflects God's nature. God is logical. How, they don't say. How exactly is God logical? Propositions are logical. That's a category error. And logic reflects the nature of my God. Okay, that's question begging. Okay, because that assumes logic. And I have a slide. You can actually do the same thing for they'll say the same exact thing for morals. They'll say, my God is the standard for goodness. So my God is good. Well, how is your God good? Oh, well, goodness is the nature of my God. So it's just question begging. You never answer what is goodness. So again, you can do the same exact thing for logic as well.
Okay, so that's an interesting one, because this is the discussion I had with Veckel along the lines of, can you really use something as a logical and moral standard? In the case I was using was a moral standard for a being that by its definition does not need to be does not need to follow its own moral standards. So if there's a God that declares that killing is bad, but yet can freely kill and not be immoral by doing it, then therefore God might be your moral standard, but him and by himself, by his nature, does not actually need to follow those morals. So at that point in time, that if you want to say that your morality reflects the nature of God, you can't really use that as your declaration, because your God's morality in by itself works on a sliding scale that he can go to any extreme and have it still be considered good. Well, we have to live within the realms of what our morality is. So same thing if you say God is logical, does that mean that God is still a slave to logic, that he cannot do anything that is illogical? And if that is the case, that God can now break his own rules of logic, can God really be your standard of logic?
Yeah, it just begs the question, and it doesn't say anything about what's logical. Example is, what if I ask you, how does sleeping pills work? How do sleeping pills put you to sleep? Oh, well, sleeping pills work by their dormitive nature. By their sleep-inducing nature. Okay, that tells us nothing. That's not an account at all. It tells us nothing about how sleeping pills put you to sleep. It simply says sleeping pills put you to sleep, but by them putting you asleep. Why is fire hot? Fire is hot because of its heat-emitting nature. So you're saying fire is hot because of its hot nature. These are not explanations. And for morality, I recommend watching my debate with Epicurus. This slide I'm showing you now is a slide from that very debate. I was waiting for Epi to actually make a point. Epi has a hard time really stressing the meat of his argument.
And I've told Epi this before too, is that he argues for points that he doesn't hold sometimes, because it's like he has to kind of validate other points. Like when somebody brings up, just like, well, William Lane Craig used this argument here, and he's like, well, actually, what William Lane Craig really means by that, and he'll go to explain it, but yet at the same time, not actually believe anything he's saying.
Yeah, he should just cut to the chase. But yeah, my debate with him, he eventually said that God is goodness himself. That God is a standard. I was actually just waiting for him. I was twiddling my thumbs, just waiting for him to say that, because I know all the arguments. I had these pre-made slides predicting that he would say that, and then sure enough he did. So I made the point. You say God is good, and what is good? Good is whatever conforms to God's nature. So you substitute the definition of good in P2 with is good in P1. You get God is what conforms to God's nature. In other words, God is God. I mean, that's all you're saying. It doesn't tell us a thing about what goodness is. It simply repeats the first one. And again, you can do the same thing with logic. You can say P1, God is logical. And what is logic? Logic is whatever conforms to God's nature. However God's, so all you're saying is God is what conforms to God's nature. You can say the same exact things with logic. And again, I make the point with Presuppigliness. Take out good or logic with Presuppigliness, which is a nothing word. So if you can say Jones has the property of Presuppigliness. What is that? It's whatever conforms to Jones's nature. So what does the fact that Presuppigliness is an essential property of Jones tell us about Jones? Nothing. We need some sort of independent definition of what Presuppigliness means. And in my argument with Epi, there is a definition. 1 Corinthians 13 is the standard of love in the Bible. So again, I'm doing with that debate, I'm doing an internal critique of whether or not their Bible God is loving or not. So again, same thing with the Bible's God. Is it logical? God is logical. Logic reflects God's nature. Again, you substitute, you have God reflects God's nature. That tells us nothing about logic. Logic reflects God's nature, how it's never specified, and God is logical, thereby making the account utterly question begging. So it's a circular reasoning. So it's you know, that's their account. If you ask them, how do you account for logic in your worldview, this is the argument they give. And this is your rebuttal right here. I'm giving you the rebuttal. Yeah, and again, it's the same thing with the moral argument. You know, this is William Lane Craig here. You know, if God doesn't exist, objective moral values don't exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. Well, what are objective moral values? Okay. Well, again, you can substitute. You know, well, what is moral? Well, God is the standard for moral. God's nature is goodness. So again, you can substitute the same thing. If God's nature does not exist, then the good attribute does not exist. Well, what is a good attribute? Well, it's God's nature. So the good attribute does exist, therefore God's nature does exist. Again, you can reword it again. If God does not exist, God does not exist. God does exist, therefore God does exist. Yeah, it's reduced to absurdity. It just, you know, it says nothing. So William Lane Craig's moral argument for God reduces down to this, and it's really crap.
Wow, really? That's really it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and this again, I mean, this goes into like I said, the what I what my talk with Beckel is that you know, and I challenged him on these points about the nature of God, and you know, whether or not you could actually say that objective morals reflect the nature of God, because I said, okay, well, you know, here, God is good, right? You know, like God, everything that God said God does is good. Everything that God does is moral. God torturing Job was moral, because God could not have made an immoral decision. So, like, even the act of God torturing Job for, you know, or allowing the Job to be tortured in itself was a good moral act, because it falls in the nature of God. Or then I asked Beckel, are you allowed to torture somebody in any situation? No. Okay. So if God can do something and have it be considered moral, but you can't do it and have it be considered moral, then at that point in time, your morality no longer reflects the nature of God, because you cannot just say that your morality reflects the nature of God is to say that any act that you do in itself would be good. Now, you can work on this as that anything that God does or anything that we do is willed by God, because God is the arbiter of everything. God does not, you know, allow. Nothing can happen without God's will. So therefore, by that act, that if Beckel was to go out and torture somebody, it would be with God's will, and therefore in itself would be a moral good. Now, if that's the case, then there would be nothing that exists out there that anybody can do that would be considered morally bad. So if you were to say that your morality now reflects God's nature, is essentially just saying anything that you do by that standard now is considered moral. So, but you can't get away with that, because everything that you do is not considered moral. So therefore, God is not the reflection of your morality, and you have to go to a more of an internal critique of what actually is moral, instead of relying on just what is the nature of God.
Right. You know, if they say, oh, well, God's commands come from His moral nature, well, then is God's actions, is His own actions coming from His own moral nature as well? So why is God, you know, why aren't we allowed to do these things, but God is, if they're coming from the same moral nature, and He's allowed to do these things, then you know, why aren't we? You know, what's this double standard?
Right. And so the point that I hit at is that, well, if you want to put God into the equation, you can say now that God has written morals onto our heart. But the moment that you say that God has written morals onto our heart, that does not necessarily reflect His nature, because He doesn't actually have nature when it comes to morals, because everything He does is good, then what you're saying is that in order for you to judge anything as moral, is that now you have to do an internal critique through your moral framework, which put you in exactly the same boat as anybody that does not believe in the existence of God. So therefore, any morality, whether it's from an atheist or a theist at this point in time, has to be done internally, which means that by your definition, all morality, including your own, is subjective of the person.
Right. And one thing, though, another argument, I was waiting for Epi to say it, and sure enough, he did say it, and I had pre-made slides to counter it, was, God's infinite, and he's transcendent, he's different from us. And then I argued theologically that God is not different for us, and again, watch my debate with Epi. I go over in that detail, and actually I saw a few slides of that here, but what is my morality based on? Well, my morality is based on human needs and the promotion for happiness, where happiness is broadly construed as sustained quality of life and the reduction of unnecessary suffering. So that's where I derive my morality from. So, why is that moral? Well, that's just simply the way we are. That's the way we evolved. That's the sort of creatures we are. It's part of our nature.
Right. This actually goes into a discussion I had with Lyrical Orion last night, because she didn't understand it at first when I had said it, but it was that I said that there's a reason why people read the Bible, read the teachings of Jesus, especially the stuff from Jesus, and it really speaks to them, because a lot of the stuff that has put down from the teaching of Jesus are one of these things that are almost like these innate feelings of morals that we already have, that we essentially all the teachings of Jesus is a written down account of all the things that we've already come to this point in time to establish as good moral actions. But how do we, where do we get these morals from? Well, essentially all that they've written down is the rules to allow, all that Jesus' teachings are essentially a set of rules that allow us to better interact in social groups. That's what it comes down to, and in its essence, that's all that morals are. Morals are nothing more than the good rewarding behavior that allows us to have developed as a social species. That is pretty much at its core what morality is. So of course, the words of Jesus, will speak to people because they're written down. Essentially, all they've done is written down things that most people will innately have to them to begin with, and this because before any of the 10 Commandments or the Scripture was even complete, the people did already know of these good rules. Moses wasn't, his people weren't killing and raping and stealing shit prior to them getting the 10 Commandments. So obviously it had to be under this innate behavior that's always that was already part of their natural development. So again, all that I can get to here is I'm not saying that morals are purely the result of an evolutionary development of us as a social species, but even if you were to say that morals are written on our heart, you'd still have to use that internal framework, and how would you ever be able to differentiate between a universe where God has written morals onto our heart and a universe where morals have developed through a process through evolution? At that point in time, you can't actually prove one is stronger than the other. All you have to do is, all you can do at that point in time is assert one of them as fact, and that's all that you're doing when you assert that morality comes from God.
Right. Yeah. So the standard trick that this is almost a presuppositional argument, but a lot of Christians do this. They're saying, "Well, how do you have objective values in your worldview?" It's almost the same exact argument as how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? They'll say, well, based on my nature and our needs and so forth. And so, they'll say, why ought you do that? And if you give an explanation, they'll say, why ought you do that? Why, it's the is ought problem. And they'll keep on, instead of saying how do you know? How do you know? They'll keep on saying why ought you do that? Why do you do that? Why should you do that? Why? It's the same exact argument. So right. They're asking you to have a moral justification for your morals. Just the way they want you to have an epistemic justification for your epistemology. It's the same exact argument. But,
right.
but we don't have a moral cause for morality. We just have a causal. We don't have a moral explanation for our morality. We have a causal explanation for our morality. Our evolutionary nature caused our morality.
Right, which is why when I get into the topic of discussing morality, the first thing that I have to do when discussing morality is break them away from God, which is what I do with my argument for that morals cannot actually reflect the nature of God. that if we do have some, if our morals are innate to us, then they are innate to us free of God, which means that that you cannot go to an external source for your morals, even if you are a theist, because you have to look internally to what is innate to you, and that's now no different than what I'm doing at this point in time. So how can I have objective morals if it has to be done through this internal moral framework? Well, I can take a look at objective facts and come to an objective moral conclusion, which is no different than now what the theist has to do. So, and every single time that they try to spill off and say, well, why is this good? Why is this bad? Well, ask them internally, why is this good? Why is this bad? How have you come to that conclusion? And if they go back to trying to reflect God's nature, like, well, no, because we've already established that your morality cannot reflect God's nature, that it's instinctual to you, that it's inside you. And that's all that I'm saying with here. Now what you have to do is prove to me that God did write that there and that it wasn't the result of evolution. Because I'm telling you that's a result of evolution. You're telling me that God wrote it there. So now we're at this impasse where how can we verify either of these? We can't, so let's just look at the basic facts. We both have to do an internal critique and to come to these conclusions, and we don't know where we got this stuff come from. Anything that you try to assert coming from God's nature is purely that, just an assertion, and not actually based on fact.
Yeah, and they have the same is-ought problem that they see. Again, the Presup argument is basically bring up a philosophical dilemma and just keep on pressing and pressing them until time runs out, and then you walk away victorious. And that's what they do with morality. Is-ought problem. You can do the same thing. Why ought we listen to your God? Oh, he's the ultimate authority. Well, why ought we accept him as our authority? Why should we,
Oh, thank you, dude. I was trying to ask these questions to Beckle and Seamus. I love that someone else recognizes this as well. Yeah, they don't have the is-ought solved. They have to presuppose that as well.
Yeah, they don't solve it. Now, if they go to, oh, well, if you don't, he will punish you. Oh, so you care about your needs? You're borrowing from my worldview now, aren't you?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess one of the things that I was really hoping to do through this, through the Presup argument, is to try to get essentially my idea for that I had with morality there is that they can assert this all this, but essentially what I want to do with them is back them into the corner to get me to the stage where they can show me why it's necessary for God to exist for logic,
right?
For reason, for knowledge.
Well, I can give you my account for logic if you want. It's a little confusing, but I can do that if you want. I'll take a little time too, but I can continue on with this. Where they say, "Oh, God's different." They basically say, do what I say, don't do what I do, sort of thing, because God's different. Well, watch my debate with Epicurus. I point out that it's the same. We're made in God's image, right? So if we're made in His image, shouldn't we have the same morality? Shouldn't we have the same reasoning capacities? If we're made, what does it mean to be made in His image? How can you say He's different if we're made in His image? And again, I offer Bible verse after Bible verse of saying, love each other as I have loved you. So it's the same love, and it's a supernatural love where it's love comes from the Holy Spirit being poured into your heart. So it's a supernatural love. It's the same love. They're saying the love is actually coming from God. Well, then if our love is coming from Him, it's His love. So it's all the same love. And again, if we're made in His image, then we love Him in His image. We have morality in His image. We have reasoning capacities in His image. So it's all the same. And again, I go into more detail. Watch my debate with Epicurus. I always like to end a debate with a quote that's kind of like a zinger, and I think this one fits good, especially against arcane. Cornelius Van Til says, "Who wishes to make such a simple blunder in elementary logic as to say we believe something to be true because it is in the Bible?" Because that's exactly what arcane says. He goes on to say, our answer is this is our answer to this is briefly that we prefer to reason in a circle to not reason at all. So here Van Til is admitting that it's circular reasoning. And he's just saying, well, we're forced to do it, which is the whole point of properly basic beliefs, right? It's the whole purpose of presuppositions. If you try to justify your presuppositions, you can only do so in pains of circularity. And here, Cornelius Van Til is actually admitting it right here. That's but the presup argument is say, oh well, justify your presuppositions. Oh, that's circular. That's circular. And here, Cornelius Van Til is admitting, well, their presuppositions are circular too. And Seitan Bruggencate has admitted that, and Arcane has admitted that. But then a minute later, they'll forget that.
Yeah, they label it under what was the term?
Virtuously circular.
Yeah.
Which is bullshit. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you want, I can try to explain logic, but it's logic is not simple. It's a complex thing. Matt Slick. If you watched Matt Slick versus Matt Dillahunty, like a week or so ago, they were talking about this, and Matt Slick was saying, well, logic is conceptual, right? And Matt Dillahunty wouldn't agree to that. So, it could be something else. I agree, it is conceptual. I'm glad Matt Slick say that, because they never said that before. They said it's immaterial. Well, what's immaterial? Well, it's not matter. Okay, well, it's not matter. What is it? It's immaterial. It tells you what it's not. It doesn't tell you what it is. But he switches to conceptual, which I agree. It is. What's conceptual? An idea in your head. All propositions are in your head, right? They're just a proposition is just a thought in your head. It's an idea in your head. Propositions don't live out in the world. If I say the apple is on the table, okay, that's a proposition in my head. The apple. The apple. The truth value of it is in the proposition, not in the object itself. It's a category error to say the apple is true.
So, but the problem with that, though, is and this is what I think one of the ideas that Matt Dillahunty wanted to avoid, is that as soon as you say that laws of logic are conceptual by nature, well, then that means that anything that is conceptual is dependent on a mind. So to say that the laws of logical absolutes are conceptual, it means that they have to be dependent on a mind, and that's where they try to throw in God at the end of that there.
Well, again, we're talking about Aristotelian logic, and we're talking, which is propositional logic, right? It's propositions, right? It's whether or not a proposition, the conclusion, is true, right? So this is propositional logic. So we're dealing with propositions. Again, it's conceptual. Yeah, it is in our heads. If there were no minds, there would be no logic, and I'm fine with that. So would
there still be logical absolutes?
No, because again, it's propositional logic. If there's no propositions, then there's no propositional logic, right?
So, that's an interesting way to go about that. So when somebody asks a question, though, in a universe free of mind, would a rock still be a rock? Exactly. And then basically at that point in time, you just say, well, no, because that's propositional logic and free of a mind. Who fucking cares? Essentially, no one's going to come to that.
Yeah, we're talking about language here. A rock would still be a rock, right? But the proposition, a rock is a rock, right? That's what we're talking about, right? That's what we're talking about, the proposition. We're not talking about the external object itself. We're talking about the proposition.
Oh, see, that's okay. That's an interesting one.
So what is truth? If we have a correspondence theory of truth, right? Correspondence theory of truth is whether the proposition corresponds to the actual state of affairs. So in logic, what we're talking about is the proposition. We're not talking about the actual state of affairs. We're talking about the proposition.
I don't know. This is kind of sticky for me, at least. It would be fallacious to say that could someone in a universe without a mind say that a rock is still a rock? Well, no, of course not.
Right.
But a rock is still a rock in a universe without mind. So I would say that would be evidence that logic is outside of our minds as well, in a way.
No, again, we're talking about propositional logic. Propositions are conceptual and they only exist within the minds.
Right, but they're referring to something. They're referring to a behavior, right? To nature of something.
Well, let's look at like a standard modus ponens argument. If I jump into the pool, I will get wet. I jumped into the pool, therefore I got wet, right? So that's a if A then B, A therefore B, modus ponens. All right. So now if I jump in, out in reality, the only thing that actually existed out in reality is I jumped into a pool and got wet, right? That's all that I existed. The inference is the inference of that doesn't exist out there. The inference of that only exists within the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was no modus ponens going on out in the external world. The only thing that happened is I jumped in the pool and got wet. Okay, all the inference, the propositional logic is something separate than the actual state of affairs itself. So it's a bad way. You sometimes hear the truth is what it is. You should be careful saying that. You should say reality is what it is. Truth just corresponds to reality.
It's a statement that corresponds to reality.
What's your definition of reality, Floyd, that you like to use?
The actual state of affairs. So imagine so they ask you where does logic come from? Imagine if you asked what makes it that a bachelor is an unmarried man? What brings that about? That all bachelors are unmarried? Well, nothing brings that about. Or what makes it the case that all stallions are male horses? What brings that about? Well, nothing brings that about. That's simply what it means. That's what we mean by a stallion. That's what we mean by a bachelor. Nothing brings it about. It's just simply what we mean by it. So let's look at the laws of logic, like for example the laws of non-contradiction. For example, the law of non-contradiction would not exist if the word "not" didn't exist and the word "and" didn't exist. Okay, A is not A is not A, right? So so the laws of logic wouldn't exist if words like "and" or "not" or "if then" didn't exist. And where does "and" exist in the physical universe? Does "or" exist in the physical universe? No, they don't exist out in the physical world. It's simply by what we mean. So the way we account for laws of logic is by truth tables of what "and," "or," and "not" means. So that's where logic comes from. It's from the truth tables of what these words mean. It's part of our language. So, that's my account for logic.
Well, hey, I have a kind of different question here. Since you brought up the whole married bachelor thing, logical contradictions, because I was talking to a Christian about this, Seamus, and he claims that a God can do the paradoxical, that God can make a married bachelor, literally. And actually, many theists agree with him, and I was kind of surprised, and I was struggling with how to explain this.
Yeah, no, it's like can God create a square or circle?
Oh wait, that's why you call me a theist, Art.
No. I was
That's
calling you a
why you've
theist.
been calling me a theist.
No. I was calling you a theist because some atheists think you're a theist, and I was making fun of that. I was making fun. Okay.
I just turned my sound back on. I had a movie playing, and that just caught the tail end of what you were saying.
Floyd is in here, gifting us with this great knowledge, and you're sitting there watching Soul Plane 2. What the fuck, man?
No, shut up. I was watching it with my daughter. I recorded it.
No, it's good. I gotta go back and watch this in the entire logic section again, because it's a completely different take on logic as I've ever kind of understood it. So
that's the only way I get some of this stuff, is if I can stop it and pause and think about it while it's going on.
Right. So Floyd, can you touch on what I said?
Could you repeat it again?
Well, about logical contradictions. Can God make a squared circle?
Oh yeah, 100 years ago, there were theologians that actually believed that they actually argued that God could actually make himself be non-existent and then poof himself back into existence.
Right, which is nonsense.
Yeah, and that idea was rejected, and this way, most people will reject the idea: can God create a square circle, or create a rock so heavy they can't lift and stuff like that? And they'll say no. God can only do what's logically possible. I guess God could create a square circle by just changing the definition, right? If he went in everyone's mind and changed the definition, and went in every single dictionary, in every single book, and just and redid the definition of what a circle is into a square, 4 equal sides, then that's the only way he could really.
But that's not really a square circle.
A good idea of a square circle was if you had a 4-sided triangle, I think they used. And if you took it from a different perspective, if you moved into a 4th dimension, that same triangle could have 4 sides.
Yeah, but it's not a triangle and a square at the same time, is it? That's because that's the logical contradiction. Can God make a square triangle? Not something that looks like a square triangle.
Yeah, I mean, the only way to do it is, again, change the definition.
Right, but it's not actually making something logically contradictory. It's just changing the definition.
Well, I don't know. Well, hold on a second. Like, what about can you make a okay? If we were to
Twilight movie.
No, if we were to take a cylinder, okay, everybody knows what the shape for a cylinder is. Can we turn that into a rectangle? And the answer to that is, well, yeah, we can actually.
I'm sorry, what's a rectangle? I'm not familiar with the English definition.
A square, just do a square. You can take a can and make a square. It's same thing. A cylinder that's just shorter.
Yeah, can you make a can and turn it into a square? And in the sense that you can, if you only had the ability to perceive it on 2 dimensions.
Yeah, but that's not a logical contradiction because it's not 2 contradictory things at the same time in the same sense.
But no, it is. It depends on the perspective. Don't just say no, it's not. I'm telling you why it is. Because because the perspective of a 3-dimensional person looking at it sees it as a cylinder. The perspective of something that can only exist in 2 dimensions can only see it exist as a rectangle.
Right. Does it have an actual nature?
But
what is it? What
would the actual nature be? Whatever is perceived on a higher dimension, then. So
yeah, I mean, we're talking about identity here, right? We're talking about identity. If you change the identity, you're creating something totally different.
But is identity just a matter of perspective? Like, so if you were to assume that something can live, let's say that I know the 4th dimension deals with time, and that there are these concepts of different dimensions, but in a different dimension, that if there was something that so even if we take this up to a 4th dimension with something that is a timeless being, that if you had something that naturally changed but transition between being a square and a circle at the same time. Think of like Recklin's avatars there. They kind of like they'll shift and morph and do something and all this other crap there. If you had like a little GIF like that transition between being a square and then it moves the corners out and then comes in, becomes a circle, and then transitions back out to a square. Now, if you were to exist on a dimension where time was not an issue, where you can observe everything kind of all at once, would that point in time that shape or that object now be able to be perceived as both a square and a circle at the same time?
Well, the law of identity is defined as such. It says a law of identity says something is itself at the same time in the same relation.
Right.
Sense or relation. So you're talking about looking at it in a different relation.
Yeah, exactly. So when you talk about this, if you were to talk about this from the perspective of a god, let's say a god. I mean, I'm just throwing this shit out there. But let's say a god existed in a fourth dimension. This matches with his characteristics because he's timeless. Time is not an issue for him. Now, if that was the case, that he could observe, all aspects of time at the same time, something that transitions naturally between a circle and a square, he would be able to observe both of those at the same time, being a square and a circle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for him, he's seeing the whole movie, so to speak, where we're just seeing the individual slides.
Right. So God could create a square circle, providing that he works on a dimension that we don't live on. And so we'd never be able to perceive that because it's a paradox, but God, who lives outside of our reality, essentially, according to most definitions, if you actually track it down, sorry, there's a fire truck going by, in whatever dimension God exists, if it's timeless, he could, in fact, create a square circle.
Well, okay, can you repeat the example again of what did God create and how him being outside of time allows him to create a logical contradiction?
Because logical contradictions are dependent on our reality, essentially. That's what I'd say. I mean, sure, Floyd would probably maybe correct me and probably throw some input on this, but logical contradictions are these concepts that we understand because they make the basis of what is real for us.
I think you're talking about physical contradictions at this point.
No, I'm just talking about just in general, is that reality itself has to go back down to eventually the logical absolutes. That we perceive reality because we have these logical absolutes, right? I mean, is there anything that you disagree with there on that one, Floyd?
Yeah, well, again, it's what we mean. Because when something's illogical, what does it mean when we reduce something to absurdity, or something's logically, something's illogical, something's logically invalid? What we mean is we just produce a contradiction. That's all we mean. So,
right.
So there's nothing illogical to say that the moon is made of Swiss cheese. There's nothing illogical about that. Now, it becomes illogical based on other premises that, if you say no moons could be made of Swiss cheese, then you say, our moon is made of Swiss cheese. Okay, boom, you just contradicted yourself, right?
Right.
So that's why it's illogical.
Yeah, that's still within the realm of the physical. I mean, even when you said that logic is conceptual by nature. Now, but whose concept? I mean, we're talking about logic is conceptual to the beings that are limited, that are to that logic, essentially.
Yeah, so, but all you're saying is in God's perspective, since he's outside of time, there is no logical contradiction. So in his relationship to reality, it's not a contradiction. So it's not even to God's. That just to I'm working on this idea that if a fourth dimension existed, that there was a being or a critter, as Ozzy said, that could exist in a fourth dimension, then he would not have the same limitations that we have to time. That essentially you're looking at something that does not maybe necessarily follow like this linear time path that we have. In that case, if something is not following a linear time path, can you now at that point in time observe things in different on a different spectrum on
when it's acting as a square and when it's acting as a circle? Can you create something that can act as a square and a circle on a time path outside of your own dimension there and still make it a contradiction? So for us, it's not a contradiction because we are limited to the logic that we understand, but it can be created by something that is logically unknown to us.
Well, that's actually a good argument against God. But the problem is, I think you're only talking about perceptions. Can God perceive, let's say someone in our world makes a circle, and then he reshapes that circle into a square.
Right.
From God's perspective, this is happening all at the same time.
Yeah.
So to him, it is a square circle. Well, that's just perception. That's just God's kind of real perception.
Exactly.
But even then,
you're right. Hold on. But even then, what you said was true. Is that it would be it does go against the argument for God, because now if somebody can use an argument like that, if you can use an argument like that to show that it is possible for God to create a square circle because he does have these properties, whatever, well then you're dealing with the fact that now God has a different laws of logic than what we have, that our conceptual laws of logic are not dependent on God, because now God's logic is beyond our own. This is what I'm saying, is that this goes back to the moral argument where God can do anything and consider it good. God can do anything illogical to us, but still be logical. So therefore God cannot be a reflection of our logic.
Well, that's a different argument, and I'm not familiar with it. But I still don't see how you've provided an example of something being illogical, or something being something violating the laws of logic. I mean, it's just about perception. I mean, God. Well, hold on. Because even in that example, God merely can observe one thing at two different instances in
right. Exactly.
Wait. Let me finish. I have to tie it down. But that doesn't mean that a thing has two contradictory natures at the same time in the same sense. No, it's just that someone perceives them to have these natures at the same time. Because remember, in your example, this thing actually just changed its shape in our sequential universe, in our temporal universe. It did not actually become a thing that has a contradictory nature to itself at the same time in the same place. And I would actually argue that God doesn't necessarily view reality all at the same time, because that would be nonsensical in and of itself. The typical kind of view of Christians and God's timelessness is that he views this reality like a slideshow.
No. I mean, see, that's not that goes against the nature of God being timeless.
No. He has. Wait.
Hold on the logic thing before you move on to the argument with God. From the argument Saka was making, is your perspective of logic wrong in the perspective of God? You're only being able to view it in quote unquote 3 dimensions.
Floyd, any ruling on this?
Yeah, I mean, if it's his perspective, he's not seeing it as a contradiction. So logic isn't way things are in this universe. It's the way it is in all possible universes.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly.
But wouldn't that be that would be kind of an how would we know? Like, how could you know? I mean, for example, like that if there was a possible situation where that there was a universe out there that did have okay, let's say that there certain beings can exist in a 4-dimensional universe. Not even gods or anything like that. Just beings themselves can exist in a 4-dimensional universe. Even if to say that universe overlapped our universe in a certain way, would we have any type of way of perceiving those creatures, those beings?
Well, it's like imagine we live in a 2-dimensional universe, and there's a 3-dimensional. So we're just a flat plane, right? And a 3-dimensional object. I think Carl Sagan actually described this in his Cosmos series. You have a 2-dimensional plane, a 2-dimensional universe, and you have a 3-dimensional object passing through that two-dimensional universe. Well, at each second that the object passes through, you're seeing a different object, right? Like a picture and a triangle passing through a two-dimensional universe. You know, you would be very wide at first, and after each moment it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, and comes to a point eventually, as it totally passes through, it disappears. So that's what we would experience. But there's nothing illogical happening there.
Right, but
that's a cylinder passing through that would either be a circle or a square, depending on in a two-dimensional universe.
Yeah. So
no, it would be a cylinder. So that's its actual nature.
No, but it's only the nature as perceived by the reality that you have.
Perception doesn't matter. We're talking about something contradictory.
Universe, you could never perceive a cylinder.
It's not about perception.
Art. Okay, this is the point. This is the point that we're trying to get at here. Is that if you did exist on a lower dimension, you wouldn't be able to perceive anything on a dimension higher than you, other than the way that you can perceive it. Is that now truth to you? Absolutely, because it corresponds to the reality that you have living in that dimension. So now, if you were to talk about, again, something that is timeless, you know, when you say, can God create a square circle? Well, again, if there is a shape that, you know, like I said, if you just created a little animated image of a square becoming a circle and then going back to a square and becoming a circle, whatever, then at that point in time, it fits within our realm of logic as we understand it, because in our realm of logic, we can't perceive the square and the circle at exactly the same time. You know, it's going to be one or the other. Now, if you were timeless, and you know, time was not a concept, and you were able to see all things, whatever, and be able to perceive it in some sort of way, you'd be able to perceive that as a square and a circle at the same time. But that's only because your perception is now built on different laws of logic. You have different logical concepts than what we'd have to perceive it, because time is a factor for us, but not for something that exists in a timeless space.
Well,
there's nothing
at the beginning of your sentence you said timeless, and then at the end of the sentence you said at the same time. You went from no time to time.
You see, this is so problem, and I know this is a difficult kind of issue. We're not talking about perceptions. I'm not saying that from my perception, I cannot think of any way how God can make it, therefore he cannot. No, we're talking about logic, laws of logic. We're talking about a thing. We're talking about making a thing that negates itself, that literally cannot exist. It negates its own nature. It's an apple that is not an apple at the same time. Only as it applies to you.
That's the thing. Is that logic? Okay, this is the point of the argument. It's not to say that God can do this thing. It's to say that by God's nature, if God could do anything that is illogical, if God could do anything that is illogical because he's not taking time into consideration, then what you're saying is that God does not have the same rules of logic that we have to follow.
No, it's not about same rules of logic. There are only one rules of logic. There is no
that we have.
Logic. No, there is no your logic. There is no mine logic. There is no God's logic. There is only logic. Things are what they are. They are not what they are not. This is basic preconditions for existence.
Well, it's in that logical paradigm. There actually are different forms of logic, but again, it's the same within the same logical paradigm. If we're talking about Aristotelian logic, which is for propositional logic, we have the law of identity. And again, what is the law of identity? The law of identity is A cannot be not A in the same time, in the same sense or relation. So if you have a square turning to a circle over time, well, that's not a problem with the law of identity, because the law of identity only says what something is at a certain time.
And in the same sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you go from 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions, again, that's a different sense. If you go from one time to another time, that's over a different period of time. So again,
right, guys, we cannot even imagine such a thing. We cannot even imagine a square circle. So how could you say that God can do it if you cannot imagine?
I would imagine all theologians will agree that God cannot do logical contradictions. I mean,
that's only because they've been backed into a corner on things to do. But I think God's being constrained by our conception, whatever
You
you
can't
Yeah. God can't be pushed into logical contradictions unless you take omnipresence. The entire concept of the Trinity.
Right.
Except all the things that are logically inconsistent.
Yeah, no, that's where if you want me to keep on going the presuppositional, I can offer strategies of attack, of offense, a lot of the times because time's limited in a presup. You go on, it goes on for an hour or two. You're so busy just defending and trying to just argue to a stalemate where just trying to get each other to acknowledge that you can't validate our presuppositions. But I can offer, attack strategies, and this is where, again, this is what I recommend for any debate with a theist. Try to do an internal critique, where you simply, and Arcane actually said it. Arcane, you hear Arcane say time and time again, which he's never shown. He says, if you take atheism to its logical conclusion, it leads to absurdity. He has never done that. And you'll hear that a lot from presuppositionalists, because what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, validate your presuppositions. Well, no. If you're going to do an internal critique, you need to take my presuppositions and take them to their logical conclusion and show absurdities. You need to do an internal critique. They never do that. So to do an internal critique, you assume their presuppositions, and then you take that logically and you try to show a logical contradiction. Okay, well, how can we do that? What do they ask you to account for? Knowledge, reason, logic, morality, right? Those are four basic things they argue with. Let's take knowledge. Well, in their ontology, in their belief set, in their worldview, they have deceiving supernatural agents, namely their God. And if you want, I can pull up Bible verses if you want me to show you them. The strong delusion verse in Second Thessalonians, I believe. Well, anyway, and also in Old Testament, you have God putting a lying spirit into the prophets. You also have God hardening Pharaoh's heart, and you have demons. You have deceiving demons. So in their ontology, they have supernatural deceiving agents. Now, given their ontology, given their worldview, how can they have any knowledge? How can they know that they're not the actual ones being deceived without begging the question? They're going to turn to the Bible. The Bible could be the very thing you're being deceived about. Again, there's no way out of it. So again, how do you account? They can't account for knowledge in their worldview, right? because of what's in their worldview. Deceiving agents. So there's one attack. Okay, what's another? They actually attack induction. They say, how do you solve the Hume's problem of induction in your worldview? Well, how do they solve it in their worldview? They appeal to the Bible, right? And I gave this argument before. Well, how do you know the Bible is going to say the same thing tomorrow as it says today? Oh, because the Bible says so. Oh, no, you're begging the question. So you can't account for induction in your worldview, Arcane. So now you can't account for logic. I mean, you can't account for knowledge, and now you can't account for induction in your worldview. Your worldview seems to be falling apart now. Okay, what's next? Logic. How do you account for logic in your worldview? Oh, well, logic reflects my God's nature, and my God is logical. Well, I already showed that's begging the question. That assumes logic is valid, and it tells us nothing about logic. So that's not an account because it's circular, so therefore you can't account for logic. So Matt Delahunty could have done that with Matt Slick and make Matt Slick look like an idiot. And so okay, 3 strikes and you're out. Your worldview is logically incoherent. Oh, I'm out of time. I have to get going. Bye. Boom. There's the end. So That would be a very ideal debate right there.
Nice. Well, that was great, man. I really appreciate taking the time going over this stuff again.
Yeah, but remember, truth is not. It's a mistake to say truth is what it is. Reality is what it is. Reality is the actual state of affairs. Truth is the correspondence between the propositions expressed in a sentence or beliefs and the actual state of affairs.
Yeah, so truth is just what comports to reality.
Right. So again, in logic, it's Aristotelian logic. It's propositional. It's propositional logic. So we're talking about propositions here, and that is conceptual. That is in our minds. If there are no minds, there are no propositions, right? Well, I have no problem with that. Matt Slick seems to be saying, oh well, if no humans existed, then laws of logic. If there's no minds, then there would be no logic. Okay, well, yeah, okay. Well, why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? You can still have rocks, and you can still have objects in the physical universe and so forth. But if you don't have minds creating propositions, then the laws of logic, aren't relevant. That's like morality. If there are no beings, would morality exist? You talk. They say, morality has to be universal. Well, if there were no sentient beings, if there was no any sort of life at all, would morality then exist? Would rape exist if there was no sexual reproduction? No. No, the very nature of those things is what makes these things exist.
Sure. Or also the idea of consent, which requires a conscious agent to grant consent.
Right.
For rape. I got a question for you, Floyd. You were talking a little bit ago, 5 minutes ago, about omnipotence, and I know you've run into the same kind of roadblock that I have with, I have no problem with limiting God's freedoms to, that's that which is not logically contradictory. I think that's fine. But when they want to call God omnipotent, but then they limit God's actions in various ways. I'm just wondering how far you can limit an omnipotent agent and still call it omnipotent. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
and so like they say, God's nature, but that seems like that can just take you anywhere.
Yeah. When they say, well, God can just do what's in His nature, well, that goes for everything, right? That says nothing.
So then Floyd is omnipotent, and I'm omnipotent, and everybody's omnipotent because we can do everything within our own nature.
Exactly. We can't fly because we don't have wings, right? So I
don't have the essence. I don't have the nature of feathers.
Yeah. So saying that is a bad way of phrasing it. They should just stick with God can do whatever is logically possible, and let's leave it at that.
Why not just say that He's super duper powerful? I mean, why even the necessity for the Bible? It's not like the Bible uses the word omnipotent. I mean, all you can really take from the Bible is that God does what He wants. He can do what He wants. I mean, the idea of Him being omnipotent might be just logical nonsense that they don't even need. They could do without it.
Yeah, something that William Lane Craig does in his debates is he flip-flops between the God of the Bible and the God of the philosophers. Aquinas is God, the greatest conceivable being. That's the God of the philosophers. Does that match the God of the Bible at all? I don't think so. None of this stuff is in the Bible, and that's where I go. I do an internal critique and show this is not what's going on in the Bible. So this God of the philosophers is not the God of the Bible.
The God of Spinoza and so forth.
Yeah, Thomas Aquinas' God is not the God of the Bible. It's the God of the philosophers.
It depends what you mean by great, right? I mean, like what I would consider greatness would include, at least at the bare minimum, would include moral goodness, which would not include things like eternal torture, right?
Right.
So I mean, if you're going to say that this being is maximally great, then we can discuss what it means to be maximally great. you know, and some of those you run into problems with that one too. I mean, if God is infinite, then shouldn't he be literally everywhere? Shouldn't he just fill up every space within the universe? Shouldn't he? I mean, I'm not exactly sure what it means to be physically infinite, or, you know, it doesn't mean much to me.
It turns into pantheism, right? You know, that God is the universe, so God is every atom in the universe, and something like that. But it becomes very vague. I mean, that's like the Trinity. You know, three distinct beings, I'm sorry, three distinct persons, but one being. What's the difference between a person and a being then?
It's a good question, and it runs into things like within Hinduism, there's the idea that I think it's Brahma. Is it Brahma or Brahman, who's the main god, and then the other lesser gods are considered to be aspects of the one major god, Brahma. I think it's Brahma.
Yeah, Brahma is the main god. He's the creator, and then.
Okay, so if there's one god, Brahma, and if all the lesser gods are really just aspects of Brahma, then Hindus, most people, if you ask them, Hinduism would be like the example everyone's going to name if you ask about a polytheistic religion, right? So, I mean, but if Hinduism, under this same standard by which Christianity is monotheistic, isn't Hinduism also monotheistic? I mean, they're just multiple persons but one being, aspects of the same central being. I mean, you could make that argument. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good argument, but you could make that case. And so,
I think one of the things with the Hindu religion that's different there is that it's different. Is that separate minds, because it's not just the gods are different aspects. Is that that every single person is a different aspect. So you don't have to say that. That their separation in the entities become in the fact that they have separate minds. That when Shiva and Ganesh break apart from Brahma to become the protector and the destroyer, they are completely separate entities from Brahma, but they are just spun off of him as an aspect. But in the same sense that's how he also creates the first man and woman whenever he redesigns the universe, is that they are just nothing more than extensions of himself. That are they separate entities to him? Yes, but they are him. In fact, the entire point of Hinduism is to eventually get to this stage where you become back one with Brahma, is that you go through life, if you do good, everything's great, you become part with Brahma. If not, you come back, you're reincarnated, and you try again.
I don't think Hinduism actually tries to declare itself as logical either. But I can't think of any major religion that's actually monotheistic.
Floyd, Hinduism is the only, just a minor correction, is the only worldview that can account for the tools of intelligibility. Every other worldview fails.
Yeah, why not?
No, I've personally investigated every worldview in the world and all potential worldviews that don't exist yet, and they all fail.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do the work. I've done it. So
I guess in the end is when you take a look at the Hindu religion, it is a very it's a religion based on hard solipsism, I guess, to a certain extent. Is that you are the only mind in the universe, because you're just an extension of Brahma's mind, but many minds can exist within Brahma's mind. It is a solipsism.
No, that is the point. It's not many minds exist. It's not your mind exists. It's his mind exists only. Yeah. You're just an extension of his mind, even though you think you have your own independent mind.
Yeah, I guess.
It's his mind, like an ethereal.
So I guess it could be considered a monotheistic religion in that sense.
Yeah, there's different ways to twist it. Christianity, in my mind, is not monotheistic, and Judaism. Well, historically, Judaism was polytheistic. It later turned into monotheism, but they all have their pantheon, right? They all have lower gods, so to speak. They might have one creator god, but they all have a pantheon of angels, demons, lesser gods, and so forth. But historically, Yahweh was the son of the Most High God, El Elyon, which they just borrowed from the Canaanite religion, and he had a consort, Asheroth, which was actually in the first temple, along with Nehushtan, the dragon Nehushtan. Those were actually in Solomon's temple, and then they actually had a monotheistic reform, like King Josiah, and also they turned, later Yahweh got promoted to top dog, the top god, and it actually says, now I think to Moses that, now you will know me as Yahweh. Yahweh just got promoted to top dog at that point.
Yeah, and I've read, or we had a talk not too long ago with Nadia in the hangout. She has an extensive encyclopedia in her head of the names of the gods and how they follow and how each one would change to conform to whatever they had their needs at the time, how they'd evolve. Has anyone ever asked Arcane how he comes to the Brahma God mix? Because he thinks, Arcane's made this statement many times, that we all only exist in the mind of God. That matter is just an illusion to us.
Yeah, I don't know where he's getting that. Yeah, I mean, he's turning into Arcane seems to be going crazy last week or so. I mean,
he's going to full Deepak Chopra.
That's like a weird twist of combining Christianity with idealism, and saying, we're actually just and I've jokingly, I mean, like a year ago in a hangout with Arcane, I jokingly said, because he said, oh, well, how do you know you're not strapped down, and the whole thing they say. I said, well, how do you know that the universe isn't just happening inside the mind of a dreaming dragon? The universe is just the cosmic dragon goes to sleep, and every time it goes to sleep, it dreams a universe, right? And this time we're that universe. Like, you can't disprove something like that.
Isn't that Hinduism? This is a God's dream.
Close to,
sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, stuff like that, I don't even know why there is no point to me anyway talking about things that are just that speculative, because unless you can say, okay, here's what it would look like from within an idealist universe versus a realist or materialist universe, here's how we could tell the difference, right? But if you could not tell the difference, then it's pure speculation either way. I mean, right. So I mean, to say, oh, we're in the mind of God, or we're in the mind of whatever, a dreaming dragon. I mean, it's a nice speculation. I guess it's kind of fun to play around with these ideas, but I just don't understand the point of even bringing it up, because you can't make any progress on something like that.
Right. That was actually my worldview for a while. And
something's wrong with your mic, Sokka.
Oh, it's above my head. There it is. Okay. No, that was actually my worldview for a while. That what's the point of even speculating about that? So that I didn't really want to weigh in on the God claim. I don't want to prove or disprove a God exists. I don't think that's even possible. And from that, I still feel my viewpoint in that is similar to kind of an apathetic agnostic, in the sense that I just don't care about the actual question of the claim. But Ozzy actually pointed out that. To me, that my view is more in line of what's called a Huxley agnosticism instead, which is the entire idea that what's the point of even arguing over a concept? It's beyond atheism, but it's more like, what's the point of even arguing a concept that we can never prove or disprove, compared to atheism, which is what's the point of arguing for something that we can't define?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Xbox, are you here?
Yep.
Okay. By the way, sorry for starting the chat war.
Oh no, yeah. I was talking to Ozzy in the second before.
Yeah, if Ozzy's going to come in, definitely save a spot for him, because he can definitely add into this conversation, no doubt.
Yeah, I did. I don't think else.
And he already added something to the whole can God make something logically self-contradictory? And he made the same point I made, that when you say, can he make something logically contradictory, like, square a four-sided triangle, you're talking gibberish. You're basically saying, can God make...
Right, that was the whole point.
No, wait. No, listen.
No, I think you're just missing the point. You're just missing the point.
Hold on. No, you're missing the point. Listen.
No, it's a straw man. You're arguing against a point that I'm not making.
Right.
No, wait. That was my point. So, can God make...
God cannot make it. God cannot make a married bachelor, because if he's married, he's, that's what we mean by bachelor. So
right, it comes down to a definition at that point.
Yeah.
No. It's not about definition. No. It's about nature. Can God make something that has self-contradictory nature, that is what it is, and it is at the same time not what it is? Well, not how we call.
I know, but okay, hold on a second. If God, if God was to, so if God created every single person, and let's say you took a Calvinist viewpoint that he wrote out the the story of their their book of life or whatever, like he knew everything that they were going to do the moment that he created them, that he can observe their life in all forms at the same time, and he starts off as a young man and he's a bachelor, but by the time he dies later in life, he's married. In God's perspective, is he married or is he a bachelor?
No, that's not how it works, by the way. And I made this point in the chat. God doesn't look at our reality as a sort of a slideshow of.
Now you're just begging the question.
Hold on. Well, no, you're presenting this idea. You're basically saying that God looks at this reality like, let's say, a film. He looks at this reality like a film that has all of its frames cut out and put on each other, so they are at the same time. The first frame is on the second frame, the second frame is on the third frame, and they're all on a big stockpile, essentially. And that is how God looks at it. Well, that's nonsensical. That's not how Christians even view this. Their view is that God looks at this reality like a, how you have this...
Yeah, but no, we know your argument, but you're
Can I just raise a question real quick, or kind of a...
Sure.
Is this, because I haven't heard this brought up, but like what is it? What is the essence of power? Like, what does it mean to be powerful? Because when we talk about like God being able to do this or that, his omnipotence is always brought up, or the fact that he's omniscient. So he knows, he has all of the information he could need, and he has all of the power that he could have. But I think we need to ask the question: is being able to create logically self-contradictory things a matter of you just need to muster up enough power and then you can do it? This is the thing. Look,
we're arguing that the constraints of a human.
That is what we're
trying to make a point here.
Xbox, that is what we argue.
Guys, let Benny finish, please.
This is not about. This is the thing. It's that the issue of whether or not you can create something self-contradictory is not about power. It's just not. I mean, it's not like, I'm more powerful than a 4-year-old in some ways. A rich man is more powerful than a poor man in some ways. There are types of power that we can talk about. A wizard would be more powerful than a non-wizard in some ways if magic were real. But being more powerful, it doesn't mean you can do these certain things, right? I mean, we are really, these self-contradictory things are just, we've defined things that are impossible regardless of how much power you have. They're just certain things that can't be done. Being a wizard, non-wizard, can't be done, right? You're a wizard or you're not a wizard. So
yeah, but as you said, you're talking gibberish. This is about language.
Exactly. This has nothing to do with power. No amount of ability will allow you to make something logically self-contradictory, like a square circle.
But Art, if it was that simple, then you could always just go back to saying, well, I'm sorry, it's illogical for God to create matter from nothing, because we know that's impossible.
Yeah, therefore, I know it does. Yeah,
therefore your God is illogical. If it was that easy, then. Yeah. But that's the problem. Is that
that is an actual argument that atheists put against Christians and theists. Yes.
It's a terrible argument.
No, it's not. How can something come from nothing? And they will say, well, God made it so. Wait, but you were just laughing at us, saying that something cannot come from nothing, that it's a logical impossibility.
No, there's nothing logically impossible about something coming from nothing. It could be the case where you have absolutely nothing. It can't. The only thing that can happen is something to pop out of nothing.
Yeah, the something coming. The logical contradiction would be saying that something came from nothing, but it didn't come from nothing. Like
or something is nothing and something at the same time in the same way.
Sure. So
I guess you're right. Yeah, guys, you're right.
And there's different uses for logic. I mean, the idea of like, if you talk to a friend and you feel like their reasoning process just isn't making a lot of sense, you might say, well, that's illogical, right? You might use that in a kind of colloquial way. Well, that's illogical what you're saying, but you don't mean it in the formal logic sense that we're using the term logic, right? So I mean, it's illogical to think that a sandwich would pop into existence out of nothing on my table right now. But it's not in the same sense that we'd say, God can't create a universe because it's illogical. I mean, we don't understand how universes come to be. We know that they come to be somehow. It seems kind of unlikely. It seems improbable for it to happen anyway. But it may end up being that it just is a necessity that, given certain conditions, that a universe is bound to be, or many universes. Who knows?
Yeah. Again, it could be the case where if you have an absolute vacuum, it can only be the case that something is going to pop out from it.
Right. Oh, by the way, when I first said, "Can God make?" and I paused and said nothing, I actually did say something, right? Because right now I said something. It's just that it's nonsense. It's nothing. It's exactly what a logical contradiction is.
Well, God is something too, right? So if they say God has always existed, God exists eternally, well, we could say some sort of quantum goo has always existed.
Oh yeah, I actually make this argument to many theists that, I think a better explanation for the origin of the universe is a supernatural phenomena that is not a mind. It's just sufficiently capable of creating a universe. That's it.
Yeah, it's immaterial. It's simply just not a mind.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's whatever God is. Just take out the person stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And there you go. Occam's razor and booyah. Debate over.
Yeah, and that's the real debate. I mentioned this before. That's the real debate for me, over theism and atheism. Does there require a mind to create, the universe or anything? Does there have to be a mind? Can intelligence? We're intelligent. Can intelligence come from non-intelligence? And they'll say no. Only intelligence can come from intelligence. Well, that needs an argument, right? And we know with evolution that more intelligent things came from less intelligent things, and so forth. But we don't know where the initial life comes from, so that's still a mystery. But it seems like with that, it seems like, well, yes, intelligence can come from non-intelligence simply by things evolving. But there's always that that it's the first domino. Who knocked over the first domino? We know where all the previous dominoes fell over because they're all lined up, but we don't know who what hit that first domino to put everything in action. That's a real question. Can intelligence come from non-intelligence? That's the great mystery.
By the way, Xbox, did you send out a link? Because there's a lot of people in the chat. I think
Yeah, I do. These are the only people, and Ozzy are the only that had it.
Yeah, let's get Ozzy in here because he can explain a lot of stuff.
Well, he was with some friends. He's going, if he gets done with them, he will.
Okay. No, okay. Well, by the way, just to clarify, and I hate to talk about this. This is such a conflicting issue. And guys, I don't have a problem with you, Xbox or Sokka, that you think God
Fuck
can
keyword.
Yeah, asshole.
It's just we disagree. Sure. Well,
I agree. You cannot do anything logically impossible because you're talking gibberish. Yeah. You're not making sense.
Okay. Let's make a compromise. I cannot say that God cannot do it, but you cannot say that God can do it because we're both talking about nonsense. We're talking about
Yeah, I would agree with the first statements I ever made about it. I would have to reword what I said, and I'm not saying that God can do the illogical, but I don't think he's bound by our conceptions of the logic either.
Yeah, see, I think that goes into my argument for this, and it's not really an argument. It's more kind of like a thought experiment. Is that when you take a look at things like these concepts like truth and reality and all these things, is that they are dependent on our concepts of them, and that let's say, for example, let me see if I can try to phrase this again here, is that our reality is based on, let's say, like I said, like logical absolutes. Like that's, you can go back to this point where, we observe our reality because of these certain logical absolutes. Now, if something could hypothetically exist outside of our reality, does that mean that it has to be constrained by logical absolutes of our reality?
Yes, it has to be.
But
really.
Hold on a second. So this is the question now: is that when you're talking about something now that can exist outside of our reality, essentially what we're saying is that it's not real, but it's only not real in the concept, in the contrast to how we interpret reality, that it might as well become a non-issue for us. Something that is not real to us pretty much doesn't exist to us. But this brings in kind of this paradoxical kind of idea that when something that doesn't exist to us, can it exist to itself in a form that we can't understand?
I don't know.
Exactly, we don't know, and I mean this is where you get into the idea. It's like, where can something live with different rules of logic? Now, I'm not just saying this is for a god or anything like this. Now, I'm just saying, but the concept of something that does not fit within our reality for all intents and purposes, is not real to us, does not exist to us. We would never ever be able to perceive it, but in its own form, can it somehow exist independent of us?
Well, Saka, here's a simple defeater. If you're saying that something that is self-contradictory can exist in another reality, we just cannot imagine how. Well, if that thing exists, it is what it is, and it's not when it's not.
No, it doesn't exist by the standard that we put on things that exist. So it doesn't exist to us, but under its own standards, can it exist?
Then it actually exists, and so it's bound by logic.
Right. It might exist.
Like another dimension or something.
Yeah,
like that.
It might exist in its own way of existing, but in a way that does not exist to us. So I mean, the concept here.
I get what you're saying. But again, it's not about our concepts. We're not talking about our logic.
No, but we are. That's what we are talking about. Whenever we talk about reality or logic, we're talking about our conceptual ideas of these things.
There is something that is beyond us, which is logic. By the way, the only theist that the only theist, according to William Lane Craig, the only major theistic philosopher who believed that God can make something logical was Descartes. That's the only one. The whole rest of them, hundreds others of them, believe that God can only do the logical, but they did not agree that it's somehow constraining them. They admitted that logic is the necessity. Logic is the one thing that everything has to be sort of only constrained to, because that's the nature
For what?
of things.
According to what?
Our thoughts.
Okay, exactly. Conceptual to us.
Right, but we cannot think of anything else that we cannot think of. So if you're talking about that we cannot think of, you're talking nonsense.
Right. But at that point in time, anything beyond that is an assertion.
No, you cannot say that something that we cannot think of could exist because you're talking gibberish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I'm just saying.
Wait. What? Our ability to think of something is not a measure of what can or cannot be. I mean, some ideas from quantum theory are profoundly counterintuitive, and we can't conceive of them. I'm just saying, like, our lack of ability to conceive of certain things could just be a measure of our failures of cognition. That doesn't mean something can.
But I guess I'm talking about something more than just our ability to imagine something. We're talking about nature. We're talking about how to best describe this? Something that is self-contradictory, something that negates itself, something that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. A square circle, right? It's a nonsensical thing. I mean, I don't know how to explain this really, but I think Ozzy said it best. You're talking gibberish when you say that a squared circle or a four-sided triangle could exist. Oh, by the way, I think we're moving on to another hangout.
Yeah, we're gonna move to the live room.
All right. Okay. Well, I will see you there, guys.
This says it's been live. But does it just mean that it doesn't get uploaded onto YouTube?
I think so. We were just making Floyd being able to present his presentation about Presup. Well, yeah, anyway, I'm going to see you there, guys, in just a moment.
What was the topic in the live room? They're going to... Ah, it's the dots.